It's my privilege today to introduce the topic of Europe-Taiwan relations. And we're really quite privileged to have two of the foremost experts on this topic, both in terms of personal experience and research experience. And I want to give a little preface by describing why this topic has become so important in Taiwan's global relations. So first, since 2020, ties between the European Union, and I should say Europe more broadly, not just EU countries, and Taiwan have actually seen a sharp uptick. But Europe's approach to Taiwan has shifted from relative marginality towards greater strategic relevance. There is growing parliamentary engagement, expanding economic and technological cooperation, and more frequent political exchanges that reflect a broader reassessment of Europe's external partnerships. Rather than a kind of single break or turning point or policy turn, this shift, because the EU, Europe, is a very diverse continent, this shift has resulted from incremental adjustments across the continent and across EU institutions. This has been driven by changing assessments of the risks and benefits associated with engagement with Taiwan. But the overall picture, I think, is underappreciated in the United States as well, maybe as in Taiwan, just how much Europe's engagement with Taiwan has shifted over the last 5 years and how much more willing European partners are to engage in frank conversations with their Taiwan counterparts, either private companies, non-governmental organizations, or even, most sensitively, government-to-government talks. And to explore these developments, I am just really glad that we were able to make this happen. We have two of the leading voices on this issue, Matej Šimalčík, the executive director of the Central European Institute of Asian Studies, and Gabrielius Landsbergis, who was a visiting fellow at Stanford, and more, I think importantly, more relevant, was the foreign minister of Lithuania when Lithuania opened a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius. Mr. Šimalčík is the co-author of a new report exploring the patterns of relations between Taiwan and the states of Europe. He will place our discussion of EU and European Taiwan relations in a kind of broader context. And so we'll have him speak first. He's got some slides to present to demonstrate the shift in trends. And then we'll hear from Gabrielius about Lithuania's experience opening this representative office and the People's Republic of China's quite forceful reaction to that step. In particular, Beijing demanded that Lithuania close or at least rename the office, and they imposed a full boycott of Lithuanian products to the point where, if I understand right, you couldn't even select Lithuania as the destination or the origin of a product that was being exported to the PRC. And that economic retaliation, of course, Lithuania is a member of the EU, that actually violated a bunch of common principles, the EU's common market, and got elevated then to an EU level. And ultimately provoked pushback from Brussels as well. And so we're going to explore that dispute and its current status after we hear from Matej. So Matej, I'll turn it over to you. We'll go ahead and get kind of the broad view, and then I'll turn to Gabrielius.
Great, and thanks for the introduction, Karis. So I'm coming here from a Central European Institute of Asian Studies. As the name suggests, we are a think tank that looks at the Europe, East Asia, Europe, Indo-Pacific relations, being based in the tri-state area of Slovakia, Austria, and Czechia. And looking at EU-Taiwan relations is one of the key pillars of what we are doing. The research that I'm going to be talking about is actually underpinned by one of our flagship products, the EU-Taiwan Tracker, which is an interactive database that we update more or less bi-weekly about whatever is happening between European member states, EU institutions on one hand, and Taiwan across political, economic realms, etc. Right. So That's where our new report is coming from. The report's called Partners in Need, Partners Indeed, tracking Europe-Taiwan relations amidst global disruption. And this is, I have to say, the first time that someone has attempted to do this sort of broad-scale comparative analysis of how individual European states are handling ties with Taiwan. As Carrie has mentioned in the beginning, this is happening at the time when the relations with Taiwan has moved from marginality into openness, into being considered somewhat of a strategic relationship, important for our not just for our security and Taiwan's security, but also for economic competitiveness, etc. The relations over the past 5 years have been evolving through something that we call the polycrisis, a successive set of various disruptions and crises happening not just in Europe but globally, which has been incrementally moving the perception of why we need to cooperate with Taiwan. Just last year in November 2025, we've seen for the first time ever Taiwanese Vice President Xiao became addressing legislators on the floor of the European Parliament, a big step in making Taiwan visible in European space. But the past 5 years that have led up to that have really been changing the perception of Taiwan. Primarily, it started largely with the Central and Eastern European countries, which have been going through something that we call China fatigue, becoming just fed up with China, making promises, not delivering on them, but having increasingly more polarizing political demands. Then, of course, COVID-19 pandemic happened, and that was a sort of first very important strategic interaction for many European states with Taiwan, when on one hand, Taiwan has been providing personal protective equipment, which was hard to get for everyone, and China was making it political if you wanted to get it from there. But in reverse, also our countries, both Slovakia, Lithuania as well, for example, providing vaccines to Taiwan, which was unable to get them on the open market because of pressure coming from China on pharmaceutical firms. Weaponization of global supply chains, the experience of Lithuania that we will hear about, that's another turning point, of course. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Taiwan is becoming there an active player in terms of supporting Ukraine, and both sides, Europe and Taiwan, are also dealing with same issues when it comes to how to navigate the current relations with the US, and that is creating another sort of space for interactions and new impetus for maybe offsetting some of the fallbacks of how the current US foreign policy is looking. As I said in the beginning, our analysis was based on this tracker that we are running, and you can see a little bit of a quantitative perspective on the relations between Europe and Taiwan. As you see, in 2019, there was only little mutual engagements across the whole EU, approximately 50 interactions that we can call that were sort of happening overtly. Of course, we are not tracking things that are happening behind closed doors. That would defeat the purpose of that kind of diplomacy, right? But it is a good proxy on how willing countries are to engage with Taiwan if they are engaging openly. And 2019, so pre-COVID, no travel constraints, maybe 50 to 60 interactions across the board. And then since 2021, such a sharp uptake, right? The hype phase of relations. Several countries were leading the charge, Lithuania being one of them. Besides that, Czech Republic, also Slovakia at the time, from Western Europe, Germany, France being quite important, but also parliamentarians on the EU level have been quite formative in how the debate around Taiwan is looking in Europe right now. Based on the quantitative but also qualitative evaluation of data, we've grouped European countries into 4 distinct groups based on how willing they are to engage Taiwan both politically and economically. And the four groups would be all partners, so those countries that sort of have a longer-term engagement with Taiwan that's rather mature and not very scrutinized. So there we put there Germany, France, and UK. Then the new friends of Taiwan from Central Europe, currently three countries, Czechia, Poland, and Lithuania. If you asked me 2 years ago, I would put my own country, Slovakia, there still, because the previous government was also very active, in some cases even trailblazing and having accomplished some developments that neither of the three other new friend countries have tried to do with Taiwan, such as concluding an extradition treaty. Poland has one. Pragmatists, countries that are not willing to touch Taiwan politically, but very happy to deal on economic relations. We have there even countries like Hungary, normally a very pro-China country, but at the same time one of the largest recipients of Taiwanese FDI in the EU. And ultimately laggards, those countries that have very little interactions. The sort of baseline criterion that we put there was that none of these countries has opened their own representative office in Taiwan. So if we were to decompose the quantitative data across the four groups and the EU, we can see that this trend is visible also in the quantitative perspective. EU, the new friends, and old partners being the most active. A little bit of a dip in 2023. The election seasons, that was a big election year across Europe, right? So not that much bandwidth to engage externally, but again, an uptake in 2024. We've published this in December, so we didn't have finalized data for 2025 yet. I was looking at the data for 2025 last night. There's again, it's gonna be a slight dip to around the 2023 levels. We need to see what to make of it. It could be, the end of the hype and leveling out of the relationship, kind of finding its natural space. But also we can maybe interpret it through the fact that Taiwan had a very difficult, domestically difficult political year last year. So again, what that means for the bandwidth of Taiwanese representatives to travel, for example, and engage externally. Looking at specifically at delegation tourism, we see that both sides have started to travel to each other quite a lot. A six-fold increase in volume between 2019 and 2024, against the charge being led by the same group of 6 countries, more or less. Interestingly, the interest in travel tends to go both ways. So it's not only driven by the Taiwanese trying to travel everywhere they can possibly, but also on the reverse, people are more and more willing to travel to Taiwan to engage on economic development, to engage on political relations, be they parliamentarians, but also increasingly executive level officers, typically limited to deputy minister. We've seen very few ministerial travel, but 2 cases do stand out. Visit of German Ministry of Education and a visit of the Czech Minister of Science last year. So maybe that will help to normalize that. If we were to look at this from a more sectoral perspective, and I'm just going to speed through this so that we can have a more of a discussion. In terms of political engagements, 3, I think, pillars we should look on. International agreements, historically a no-go to sign a binding legal international treaty with Taiwan. Increasingly happening, it's least problematic when it comes to those that facilitate economic ties or people-to-people ties. But we also see a growing number of treaties on legal cooperation, for example, and those very strongly imply sovereignty because they touch upon the operation of judiciary branches. 6 criminal judicial cooperation agreements across Europe in varying countries geographically, but until now still only 2 full extradition treaties that also help to shield Taiwanese citizens from potential extraditions to PRC, which has been a problem historically in Europe until the European Court of Human Rights has stepped in a few years ago and prohibited any extraditions to China due to human rights violations. Defense and security, again, a topic that has been long-term taboo, but that is increasingly challenged thanks to three developments. Growing recognition of interconnected nature of European and Indo-Pacific security. In the past few years, the key naval powers of Europe, Netherlands, Germany, France, and UK, all of them have conducted freedom of navigation operations in the Pacific, including in the Taiwan Strait itself. Soft security cooperation, collaborating on issues like economic security, supply chain resilience, critical infrastructure protection, dealing with Chinese and Russian FIMI operations. That's again something that's creating a new space on how to interact with Taiwan on security. The so-called global cooperation and training framework, GCTF, has been a key platform for this, originally set up between Taiwan, US, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, I think. No, Japan. Now we have a first European member, the UK, and hopefully that will open door for more European engagement. There has been ad hoc engagement through this platform, but not a full membership yet for most countries. And of course, commercial links in the security adjacent sectors. That's also opening the space, increasing interest to collaborate with Taiwan, not just on semiconductors, but also on drone production, energy security, European companies being key investors for Taiwanese own energy security, which is in a very precarious position. And last but not least, representative offices. Currently, majority of European states have decided to open or host Taiwanese representative offices. Typically without using the name Taiwan, just Taipei, Lithuania being the only exception. But we are losing momentum here on this topic. Before Lithuania, the last country to open a representative office was Slovakia in 2003, and for almost 20 years nothing was happening until Lithuania decided to reciprocally open representative offices. Estonia is now negotiating, but over the past 2 years there has been no meaningful development on this, because the two sides cannot agree on how to name the office, whether to go back to calling it Taipei office or stick with the new status quo of Taiwan office that was established in the Lithuanian case. Economically, EU is Taiwan's largest investor, which is sometimes not a known fact, given that if we would look at this from a member state perspective, which is often the perspective that you would see in literature, it would be, very kind of splintered across individual member states. But if you add up the EU as a whole, it's the largest investor in key sectors of Taiwanese economy, even including in the semiconductor industry. And there's growing interest in attracting semiconductor investment out of Taiwan to Europe. So TSMC is building a fab in Germany. Other investments happening in terms of design of chips, workforce development. But it's also important to look at other economic opportunities so that we don't get locked into this one sector only. And there's just a few examples that the German Chamber of Commerce is promoting, for example. Last but not least, subnational actors are an important factor in how relations are developing. Sister cities and regions often act as conduits for relations when it's difficult to engage on the governmental level. But Europe is still lagging behind in terms of volume of these subnational engagements compared to the US or compared to Japan, for example. The key constraint being structural, and the fact that we have very small Taiwanese diaspora in Europe compared to US, for example, which then doesn't kind of push for having more ties like this. Think tanks and universities, again, an important platform for Taiwanese to engage with Europe, often kind of creating a reason for Taiwanese politicians to travel to Europe. And the third pillar, party-to-party dialogue, that's something that I keep thinking about that needs to be established more, and that's not really being used right now. Just to have direct party-to-party conversations on the staffer level, for example, before people get elected to office, so that they can establish ties prior a period when it is complicated to engage because of the diplomatic constraints. Here, just a map of cities and regions across Europe cooperate with Taiwanese cities. I believe it was Tainan and Taoyuan and Taipei and Kaohsiung being the most active Taiwanese players in that space. Of course, it's one thing to describe what the relationship looks like, but we also need to look in the future. And as we see rise of populism, rise of pro-China political forces across Europe, Taiwan, and also us, we need to think about how to future-proof the relationship so that it can remain long-term sustainable. So 4 pillars to look at moving forward: economic resilience, making sure that also Taiwan delivers on economic pledges it has been making to the smaller European states, so that instead of China fatigue, a Taiwan fatigue doesn't set in. Oftentimes we've seen that the economic activity has been a little bit improvised without proper identification of overlapping interests. So this is going to be important moving forward. Removing remaining market access barriers against something that's moving on very slowly. On one hand, EU reluctant to conclude a full-fledged trade and investment treaty with Taiwan, but at the same time, only marginal developments in removing some of the persistent trade barriers, such as, for example, in the wind energy market, where the EU actually had to 2 years ago initiate the WTO proceedings against Taiwan just to move things along. Political signaling is going to still be very important, just to keep Taiwan in the conversation, in the headlines, so that it doesn't get forgotten. Important for Taiwan to invest more in interactions with upcoming credible young political leaders, so that a new generation of Taiwan-friendly politicians is gonna be in power at some point. Of course, trust-building, public diplomacy, also important pillars, and I'm gonna stop here so that we can move along.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Matej. And I realized as you were speaking, I didn't provide an explanation for why this sort of diplomacy has to be informal or semi-official, and that is that none of the countries of the EU actually have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and that's because of the one China principle that the PRC insists on, that if you recognize and establish formal diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, you have to end any formal diplomatic engagement with the Taiwan side. And every country in Europe, with one exception, the Vatican, if we call the Vatican a country, has made the decision to switch from the Republic of China on Taiwan to the People's Republic of China. And as a consequence, there is a lot of pressure that the PRC puts on countries that dare to kind of challenge this one China principle. So with that lead in, I'd love to hear Gabrielius talk a bit about the Lithuanian experience and the decision to engage with the Taiwanese, knowing perhaps that you were going to get some significant blowback, some significant pressure from Beijing.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. It was great to see 2021 on all the slides. Kind of coincidentally, that was the same year when Lithuania invited Taiwan to open an office in Vilnius. I believe that that there was potentially an uptick of interest in Europe surrounding the relationship between Lithuania and Taiwan, and that I believe helped to boost understanding and visibility of why it is important. In explaining the reasoning behind our decision, I have to go back, and I would have to start with what Matej mentioned with the China fatigue. China started early on seeing Central and Eastern European countries as a region of particular interest. And not just an interest, but basically, of a strong arming interest, where they would have natural relations with Germany, United Kingdom, France, so they would cluster what they seen as a post-Soviet region, believing that our years of occupation would somehow make us more friendly over to the approaches from China. And this is in some cases, those who are, trying to see how China develops its diplomatic network and how it works in a diplomatic area is, what we call heavy-handedness. So Lithuania is as far as from post-communist country as you could imagine. We were occupied, we lost our freedom, we fought for it, we won it. And we're very much back into the West where we believe that we belong. So anyone approaching us and suggesting that we have something in common, meaning years of occupation, doesn't really work well. And in my country, I'm sure that it's throughout the region is pretty much the same. We're a very proud Western country. So we felt that the relationship is a bit off, especially being clustered, in the one region, and then there was a proposal to even formalize it into a community, which was called a 17+1, which is a very bizarre structure, comprising of European countries, non-European countries such as Balkan countries, Western Balkan countries, which are candidate countries but not part of EU, and then having this chance to have meetings once in a while with the president of China. For us, it felt that it's a divisive structure. We would very much, we would rather have a policy, a European policy to China, or than individual policy to China, rather than Germany having their policy, and then 17+1, 17 countries in Europe and outside Europe would having to navigate our own thing with China. So early in 2010s, Lithuania started making decisions when it comes to our relationship with China. So first it started with basically banning China from participating in, not being able to participate in public contracts when it comes to our strategic sectors. So ports, airports, customs systems, China-free systems. So we would not want them. First indications from our intelligence services came that the interest goes beyond pure economic. So that's early in 2010s. So we started silently cutting off and limiting access of Chinese interest into our country. Fast forward 2019, Lithuania is one of the countries who, if anywhere in the world, there is a fight for freedom, you would probably see Lithuanians supporting that fight. So if it's happening in Belarus, Vilnius is full of Belarusian flags, Georgia full of Georgian flags, Ukraine, it goes without saying. Same thing happened with Hong Kong. So Lithuanians would support, people of Hong Kong. 2019, we had protests by Chinese embassy, by, in the main squares of Vilnius, protesting in support of Hong Kong protesters. One of those protests went very bad. China decided to intervene. So Chinese embassy, with the help of the ambassador and military attaché and some other people, they gathered a group of counter-protesters, so Chinese people residing in Lithuania. They were provided, plaques and other things to counter-protest, and they were brought over to the main square of our capital, where they clashed. There was a clash, physical clash, and it was very quickly revealed that it was not genuine. There were no counter Hong Kong protesters in Lithuania, which is a very bizarre, thing, where it was organized politically and financially supported by the embassy of PRC. So that became a political issue. So not only China has an economic interest in our countries, it also has a political interest to steer us away from our, the way that we, not just the government, that the people would see what is important and what they want to support. So that led us to 2020 election when the newly elected parties to the parliament started, debating about the new program, and several elements of the foreign policy program were added. So one is that it's in Lithuania's interest to work closer with democratic partners. We've paid an enormous price betting on Russia. I mean, we did not have a chance, much chance, when we just broke free. So, Russia was a natural partner. But then, due to economic changes in Russia, due to them using economy as a weapon against Lithuania, we paid an enormous price for that, to break away. Same thing happened with Belarus. I mean, and it goes without saying, that you can just, add one more country where you would ask yourself a question: is it reliable? Somewhere down the line, and we are already seeing this, that our interests will diverge, and China will use our trade as a weapon against us. That means that we need to wean away and try to, to establish ourselves stronger with democratic partners. Now it's called French-shoring, whatever, but I mean that, our concept was very much from experience. Second thing is, China is an overwhelming economic presence in Eastern and Central Europe when it comes to our dependence on supply chains. That has been seen through COVID, so many other occasions. If you just, open the books, you see that every single country in Europe depends on China. The good thing was that Lithuania's dependence was rather limited. So to give you a comparison, our trade with China, as much as we would export to China, was about 300 million euros. So in comparison, our trade with Latvia is probably, I wouldn't know the latest numbers, but like 4 or 5 billion euros. So 12, 13 times more than we would trade with China. But that was growing, and it's still growing right now. So, so the dependence is still there. That means that it's in our interest to diversify our economy. And lastly, there is also a geopolitical interest. We do understand that there's a shift happening in US interests globally. And, know many people, and I participate in a number of conversations here at Stanford about where United States interests are. It hasn't started with current administration. It has started long ago. United States sees major interest in Indo-Pacific rather than Europe. So for us, in a country that is so much dependent on the security guarantees by our main ally, United States, it's wise to think about the possible contingencies in the future and which side are we actually on, and to declare it preferably sooner rather than later. That was the thinking that led to Lithuania to actually start drafting our own Indo-Pacific strategy. A country of 2.8 million people, very, very far away from Indo-Pacific, decided to have its own strategy based on certain elements that I've just mentioned. And it wasn't just about Taiwan. We've opened new embassies. We opened embassy in Korea, Australia. So we really pushed ourselves forward in this direction. One of the elements was our approach to Taiwan. And in early 2021, there were first meetings between the ministries in Taipei and in Vilnius, where we voiced our interest to open an office in Taipei and suggested Taiwan to open an office in Lithuania. It would have been, nothing extremely special, just that negotiation was about the name. How should the office how should we call it? And it does seem like, to an outsiders, it seemed like a small thing, and maybe some people, just, kind of, why would make a fuss out of it? I had, I was one of the people making the decision. I believe that identity is a very big part of sovereignty. We've seen what is happening, in Ukraine, where, Russians are one of the main justifications for their war and, atrocities that they are doing in Ukraine is basically by trying to erase the identity of, sovereign country. So that resembles strongly with me knowing our country's history, seeing what is happening geopolitically in our region, and then, the war caught up with us in Ukraine. Kind of the identity question was a very central part. So we decided to allow Taiwan to open an office under the name Taiwanese Representative Office in Lithuania. So that's still the only office, to my knowledge, in the world where a country does not share recognition of diplomatic recognition of Taiwan that would allow an office to be called that way. There was an interesting diplomatic issue there because we negotiated a name in English and Lithuanian. We didn't negotiate the name in Mandarin. since not too many people read Mandarin in Lithuania. We later found out that, that even though in Lithuanian and English it's Taiwanese, it's very much Taiwan representative office in Mandarin. China's reaction was extremely harsh. We informed them early on that this is going to happen. We explained the reasoning why it is happening. We explained that it doesn't go against the international agreements that we've signed with the PRC. We're not transferring the recognition. We're just allowing Taiwan to establish. And it's, we've used the example, for example, of the institute, U.S. institute, so-called embassy in Taipei, which also uses the name Taiwan, right? So we said we're not the first one. It has happened in the past. And we just kind of resurfacing the same situation that has happened in the past. The office itself opened in 2021 November. In beginning of December, we got information that the people, the companies that were exporting stuff to China are unable to declare the goods. So whenever they would try to enter their shipment on the custom systems, Lithuania is just not there. So as simple as that, Lithuania just poof, disappeared. Later, when we started a WTO case against the PRC, apparently that was a glitch in a computer system. Led our Taiwanese friends to ask a question, so can we trust the Chinese systems? I mean, if they have so many glitches, right? That was actually, I'm pretty sure that was part of the complaint. Actually how well the system is run. At the moment of closure, basically when the wall, fell, it was closed to Lithuania. About 90 ships with Lithuanian cargo was stopped in the sea. They would not continue their journey over to Chinese ports. So it was, the first task for the government was to figure out where to put all the goods, beer, peat, grain, lasers, whatever we export from Lithuania, where do we put it? It's somewhere in the middle of Indian Ocean. And this is where we really struck a very strong partnership with Washington. And we really were helped out. That would have been extremely difficult for us alone, to figure these elements and on our own. So with with some diplomatic help from our friends in DC, Japan took beer, Taiwan took lots of beer, Malaysia took our peat, and so on and so forth. Countries took grain. So basically a couple of weeks, maximum a month, we solved the immediate problem. But and China tested that, so we're not backing down. We're not escalating, but we're standing our ground. The pressure is increasing until one moment when that situation was really tough, when one major automotive company in Germany was informed that due to the fact that they have a Lithuanian produced, it actually was a window opener button, so not a major part in the automobile, but due to the fact that they have this Lithuanian produced window opener, the shipment of cars will not be allowed to enter China. And that's called secondary sanctions. So sanctioning a German company that is working with Lithuania, that's thousands of jobs in my country. We have very close cooperation with German automotive industry, thousands of jobs in the cities, and just the country is 2.8 million people, so losing 3,000 jobs in one town, that's a crisis. So this is where again, we reached out for help from EU and United States, and this is where really Western alliance, if show that we are able to support a partner under pressure. So I remember now and watching, for example, China, Japan is still under coercion by China. There's not as much support. I'm really surprised at how silent we all are, especially in coming from Europe, when it comes to the pressure that Japan is under. Because in our case, not only we got statements by the US officials, by European officials, we got a G7 statement, supporting a country of, my country. And we started the WTO case. That was when I say we, basically we initiated, but that's a case for European Union because it's a trade matter. This is where Brussels has a main competence. So that was, the center of an issue. We were able to convince the company, the automotive company, to push back on Chinese demands. They were able and still are able to export the things that that are Lithuanian produced. Don't ask me how. I don't entirely know. I might not want to know. But so we overcame that. That's the most important thing. We pushed back, and Taiwan is still very much present in Lithuania under their name. It's not without issues, clearly. I mean, and to finish off, is that in 2024 we had election. A center-left coalition was formed in Lithuania with very pragmatic position towards our stance in the world. They're starting looking at the books and asking how much investment did we get from Taiwan. More could be hoped for, and they're saying, well, maybe we need to review the whole situation. Happily, they didn't, understanding probably also the reputational potential cost that would come with it. So they don't share maybe the strategic outlook. The reasons why we started the whole journey towards that direction. And when I mentioned reasons, there was no investment from Taiwan wasn't on the top of it, right? So we definitely saw it differently, a little bit like from the current government. So there is. The debate is not over. I'm glad that Taipei is participating in debate pragmatically and and offering concessions and kind of thinking about how to move forward in the best manner. But I still looking back, I think that the Lithuania's case has a lot to show for. It doesn't mean if you're under pressure by the PRC that you have to back down, that you have to apologize, that you have to do what you're told. You are able to defend your interest. And even if a small country can do that, I think that others can do that as well. What is needed? Alliances. And I think that, because every country is a small country when compared to China, we all need alliances. Be it Germany, be it, in my humble opinion, even the United States, we all need alliances in order to withstand and show that there is a clear alternative for those who are still thinking about which path to choose. So thank you.
So I'm going to ask both of you a question and have you kind of react to each other's presentations as well. And then we'll do a second round and take questions from the audience. So Matej, my question for you is, we heard the Lithuania story. Lithuania is kind of an outlier in Europe, being very kind of proactive in attempting to engage with Taiwan and being willing to pay, as we heard, a significant economic and political cost for that. I noticed the maps that you were putting up. There's a lot of variation across Europe, and it didn't obviously map onto the domestic kind of array of parties in those countries. It didn't really map onto traditional geopolitics. And so I wonder if you could speculate a little bit about what seems to be driving, why maybe another way to put this is, why don't we have more Lithuanians in the EU? Why are the majority of countries either pragmatists or laggards? And then for Gabrielius, I'd love to hear a bit more about your conversations with Brussels on this issue and the way in which you were able to get the EU ultimately to kind of coordinate a response to this PRC pressure, and whether there was some variation among the members of the EU in how that conversation went. People you had to really work on hard to bring along versus others who were behind you from day one. Let's start with Matej.
Yeah, great question. I would say a lot of that has to do with domestic situations in each of those countries. That's why you wouldn't really see them falling into neat geopolitical patterns that we would normally see. One key reason would be poor China competence, poor Taiwan competence in those countries. You still see politicians, commentators mistaking one China principle versus one China policy. A key distinguishing feature of what that means, right? Under China's one China principle, you would be not allowed to interact with Taiwan at all. One China policy is our own definition of that, our own interpretation, which also US has its own one China policy. We have our own one China policies, which look at things differently, right? So this is one key thing. Good thing is we do see growing emancipation of Taiwan studies across Europe that can hopefully contribute towards better understanding of how to navigate the relationship. Secondly, I would say that in some cases we see countries projecting their own domestic identitarian anxieties into relations with Taiwan. So why is Spain not engaging with Taiwan? They would feel that they are normalizing Catalonia's sovereignist demands, right? The same with Cyprus, which has an ongoing dispute with Turkey over half of its territory, right? So that would be another reason why some countries don't touch Taiwan. But in most cases, it's also sometimes just a little bit of a happy political coincidence that political parties that will be more naturally friendly toward Taiwan happen to be in power. That's one reason, actually, also, and I didn't get to it through the presentation, why we've seen big uptake in relations with Taiwan, especially in Central European countries around 2020, 2021. In many of those, the elections brought in pro-Taiwan political parties to power. These political parties, like, for example, in case of Slovakia, they tended to be pro-Taiwan forever. They just, in Slovakia, for example, have not been in power for the past 10 years, right? And all of a sudden they came to power. So that kind of unlocked the opportunity, which is also, I would say, now a big challenge for Taiwan, how to deal with the fact that elections happen every 4 to 5 years. Friends of China are bound to come back to power, right? And how to maintain the relationship. And we've seen that in some cases it was easier, in some cases not as easy, right? I think Gabrielius described the situation in Lithuania very well, right? That Taiwan kind of managed to stay in the discourse. We have a new government in Czech Republic now that's looking at normalizing time with China, doing a soft reset. But they are also saying that they will at least maintain the pragmatic economic relations. Good thing for Taiwan there is that Taiwan is actually a far larger investor and employer than Chinese companies. But it's the reverse, for example, in Slovakia, right, where the pro-China government was very quick to abandon Taiwan because despite the huge openness of the previous Slovak government to Taiwan, these economic opportunities that would have kind of helped Taiwan to stay in the discourse did not materialize to such a large extent.
Thank you. Well, probably a couple of elements here. So my first phone call with a high European official regarding the question was very simple. They called me late in the evening, just close the whole thing with Taiwan. Yeah. And, we don't want to debate it. We don't want to discuss it. It's a nuisance to everyone, just do it. And, I wholeheartedly disagreed with that position. I said, the way that I imagine, European Union, us being, small country being in this, community, is that you actually are there to defend the small guy. And the first thing that you do, you go ahead and break his arm. I mean, you're so powerful, right? You have all those instruments, and the way that you choose to use them is breaking my arm. Did you try to break China's arm? In any way? No. Why? I mean, so why do we give you part of our sovereignty? So that you use that against me. First you go ahead and try, persuade China that, that you're going to stand behind us and with us and support us. And then we'll see where it takes us. My relationship with the person never soured. We remain good friends, and I'm really glad about that. But that was about as much pressure as Lithuania got. What happened next was what's important. It was by the time. So for those who might not know, we have this rule that the presidency of European Union switches every 6 months. And that means that a presiding country has quite a lot of power. If it tends to use it, well, and that half a year until the new year was France. And I've met French government who might not necessarily be entirely sympathetic to my transatlantic ideas at the time, but they are quite interested in European sovereignty and ability to defend Europe. So actually, France was the one who supported the statement by the European Union in order to support Lithuania. So that was an important measure. Then, last but not least, the quite well managed U.S. diplomacy. I had conversations with, for example, Italian diplomats who said, well, we received these calls from Washington asking to support you. We wouldn't otherwise, maybe, but it was a nice call. So, what do you need? So that kind of all these elements, they just came into place and provided a very strong pushback. At last, to kind of finish my answer is that I think that the WTO case. We tend to think about WTO as an organization who's not entirely efficient, right? It hasn't been able to, to issue verdicts because of U.S. non-participation in the second tier of court. And but the proceedings themselves, they are an unpleasant event. A tiny Lithuania, issuing all those tons of protests against, enormous People's Republic of China. And they have to answer. And we were in the same room. And, and this table basically it equalizes us, which shouldn't work. That's not the way the world works, right? And, but it did. That means that the institution can provide a more equally leveled playing field for countries like ours. And this is where actually China started backing off. This is where they started figuring out, okay, that was a glitch. We've, just nobody wants to buy that Lithuanian beer because, it's just not good enough anymore. And so they had to really rethink you just cannot go out there and say, we're banning you. Because there is a court case immediately after, because that's illegal. So you have to start being, innovative about that. And I associate the return of our trade, because now trade is back, where even though publicly nothing has changed, politically nothing has changed, but trade is back. We're able to export almost everything that we wanted, and even more. And I associate that mostly with the WTO case, because they wanted to prove the way that they fought the case was that it was a glitch. That wasn't technical. That wasn't political. So the glitch has to be solved, right? So in order to solve it, you have to show that the trade is increasing, or you have to admit that unfortunately that was a now tried ban. So institutions also play our part. In this world, to support institutions, very difficult task. That's the story.
Hey, you wanted a two-finger on this.
Yeah, just wanted to add one thing. That's from the outside, it also looked like at the moment the discourse on how to support Lithuania within EU changed in the moment that China started to attack not only Lithuania, but the single market itself, right? So that case with the German companies pressure weaponizing the supply chain, right? That was really the breaking point where all the other member states started to get in line to offer their support, because that would challenge the whole idea, the basic tenet on which the EU is functioning, right? And it's also interesting from the perspective that I think China would have probably been way more efficient in pressuring Lithuania if it stuck to that bilateral level only, because I think it would have been much more difficult for you to get the support. But with this, it overplayed its hand a little bit. And we got also the whole conversation of economic security going finally, which was no conversation before, right? The anti-coercion instrument came out of it. So bad situation to be in, but it got us on track a little bit, I think, as well.
Great. Okay, so we've got a great audience here. I want to hear from you all. So if you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and I will call on Dr. Diamond across the table as our first speaker. And I'll keep a list here.
I have two questions. The second is shorter than the first. The first question, main question is, how is Europe thinking about the possibility of, Chinese military or coercive action against Taiwan that might require Europe, aligned with the United States, Australia, Japan, Korea, to take some response? I don't think many people are expecting Europe militarily to act the way the Trans-Pacific Alliance would need to react. But speak of supply chains, I'd be interested to know what preparations Europe might be making to impose the kind of sanctions that would clearly need to be communicated in advance to deter this. And my second question is more specific. Do you know where we can buy Lithuanian beer?
Go ahead.
Okay, so
you field the beer question.
yeah.
I like your answer to the first question. I'll act on your answer to the second.
Yeah, I have not yet found Lithuanian beer in Bay Area, but I'm sure that it's possible. We will figure it out. Don't worry. So the first question, I would start it a bit. I would answer it a bit differently, because it's a very important question, and that has been with me through my years as a minister, and still I'm thinking about this. There is a shift, a paradoxical shift that is happening not in Europe but in the United States, and I associate it, clearly at this stage with the current administration and probably a couple of people within the administration and the way that they think. Europe is getting a message, a non-ambiguous message, that you shouldn't be interested in Indo-Pacific. That has been expressed to my country and to other countries as well. Your outreach is not needed, and even if you look at the national security strategy of the United States that was presented last year, it alludes to that fact that Europe's responsibility is Russia. And I don't fight it, right? But I'm still thinking in the terms of the the Western alliance, right? So for me, it is difficult to understand why this message is being sent, because there will be people in Europe who would who will take that in and say, okay, if they would have seen their interest in Indo-Pacific just through the transatlantic lens, and they're getting this answer from Washington, they will act upon it, and they will say, fine, this is not ours, we're not interested, we'll trade with China as much as we need, and that's that. But the next part of your question and my answer is that I don't see it in any way possible that the contingency in Indo-Pacific would be solved without the European assistance, at least economically. Imagine now what has been happening with a tariff debate between the United States and China. When China reverted part of its trade over to Europe, basically dumping the things that it would not sell to the United States, it started dumping it on Europe. I don't think that is smart from European perspective, but we accepted it. So imagine if there's a war in Indo-Pacific and a real trade rupture between China and the US. China would divert its trade over to Europe. That's the only continent that is able to substitute the United States market. I mean, not entirely, but I mean, at least partially. And US would not ask from EU for assistance in this. I literally have no idea that would happen. That would be happening. So that means that I believe that EU will have to play a role. I would rather it to be a deterrent role. I would rather we would be partners in this, and why I stressed the alliance part in my initial intervention. I believe that it's important, it's crucial, and we should be working on that. And there are countries in Europe who are willing to be part of this alliance.
You think, Karis?
Just sure.
Yeah, just to follow up on the first part of your answer, because we saw on the slide that there are freedom of navigation operations. Are those at all being questioned right now within the European frame? As a result of the unambiguous.
I might not know everything, since I'm out of the office, but if we would have been encouraged to participate, while US knows that our capability to show force in Indo-Pacific is very limited, there are just a couple of countries who are able to do that practically, but we would be encouraged. The more flags, the better. You would probably would have seen Lithuanian flag even. I know that we have applied to participate in the exercise in Philippines. Just as an observer, right, to know and understand what's happening. I would believe that there is less of that encouragement now, which I find rather strange.
Let me maybe add on to that. Yeah, militarily, I think that we are not going to see European countries participate in any way. Even if you look at the Taiwanese discourse about it, okay, like the publicly facing, they're of course encouraging, to have more collaboration with European countries on defense, but privately they're not counting on Europe showing up in case of a military conflict. The logistic of it will also be problematic, right? And especially if that would lead into a two-front escalation where Russia and China act in tandem, we might actually need that division of labor, right? So that's something to keep in mind. But economically, EU is going to be absolutely crucial in terms of making sure that any form of sanctions are going to be efficient, right? Not just to take away from the table this idea that EU can be a dumping ground for rerouting product, but even like using that offensively, right? And we are sometimes forgetful of this in the EU, that we are the largest trading partner for China, right? We do have leverage that we can use against China. We are just still unable to get over this mindset that we should not use trade for non-trade purposes. Everyone else is doing that. So we are the last to kind of get it.
I have Rowena next.
Salute to your country for your decision regarding Taiwan, especially in front of all the money and power. My question is, as you mentioned, there's all this soft power propaganda exporting, like the kind of two groups protesting in one major event has been happening everywhere. I think as early as 1997, I remember at Harvard when Jiang Zemin was visiting, and there was this huge crash, and the police trying to separate the people, they were very confused, like who's the right, who's the wrong. They just took it as in democracy, there were two different groups of people disagreeing with each other. I think that's also the case more obvious these days. So I just wonder, how did you convince, what's the public opinion in your country? Like, how did you convince the people? Because very often when we talk to the government people, they said, I'm sorry, but we have national interest with public opinion, so we cannot do this with China. So how did you deal with that? So what's the public opinion, and how did you deal with the propaganda, now everywhere, trying to convince people to this PRC stand?
First of all, thank you for kind words. I would say it's contested. It's contested, not for the fact of Taiwan and our support to Taiwan, but kind of picking up on against China. Maybe we shouldn't have fought China. They're so big. There could have been other ways how to deal with that. So it's interesting thing that when just the decision was announced to allow Taiwan, and and so much support arrived from Taiwan. So we would have people in Taiwan, raising Lithuanian flags and kind of, so that was very well accepted. So people kind of, as I said, they enjoy supporting free people in Lithuania. So there is this connection. But when China's pressure started, and then when you start hearing, representatives from businesses, well, we cannot export, we're losing business, we're losing money. This is where, people are maybe not happy. The problem with China was that they, again, played this very heavy-handedly. They are increasing pressure. And even now, for example, now they decided talks with the current government. And maybe current government even started saying, well, maybe we should change the name of the office, maybe something. And Beijing said, well, we're not interested in changing the name. We have to close it down. And this is where Lithuanians will say, well, I mean, why would you, say that to us, right? And then at least from the latest information, I understand that the government just walked away from this. So we're not interested. Yeah, but I mean, I would like to see Taiwan playing a stronger part in this. Being a bit more proactive. That is an opportunity for Taiwan. What has been happening in Lithuania. The door has been opened, and really play the field. Be a player in this. There is an opportunity there. That has not happened, and that's a bit of could be a lost opportunity.
Okay, Alyssa, and then I'll come to Casey.
That's really, I really wanted to follow up on that point, talk a little bit more about strategic messaging for Taiwan. Is when earlier this year, when the president came out and said, oh, we kind of regret that we made a mistake, that we, China seized the opportunity to launch humongous propaganda. One thing is very funny, and they actually now came out with a new name for Lithuania called the little one. Why? Because in Chinese, Lithuania is Litauan. So it's a wordplay, say Litauan, the little one. So what does that mean? I was literally reading different things. It says, the little ones, how dare you to challenge, the big brother? And in a way, hey, this is a free ball for Taiwan. Why not embrace the identity of being little one? This is a time to have global coalition against this is the anti-bullying coalition. You should be proud of being little one, little but mighty. This is, it's all about turning that propaganda into something positive.
Absolutely. You're little as you're only little in your actions. That's my point, right? If you're able to withstand something, then you can be little, but you can be a diamond, and just uncrackable. So what does it make you? So I believe that this, the kind of the strength of the small countries, the ones that that happened to break the Soviet Union 30 years ago.
Power of the powerless.
Yeah, that's what I'm alluding to. Yeah, exactly. To Havel. But I mean, and the same thing right now, right? Because the current world allows us opportunities to withstand these pressures if we play them smart. It doesn't mean that the rules are written and we have to abide by them. The rules are adaptable, and we can make it for work for ourselves. As you say, Taiwan can play a stronger role, especially addressing the societies, and kind of talking to the people. So because it felt that at times politicians do all the talking. It's very difficult. It's contested in democracy, right? So you have Landsbergis talking, you have another party saying a different thing, and so you need more arguments. And who is better to provide those in Taiwan?
Yeah, I think that really also, embrace that little one identity would be a way for Taiwan to connect with the global South, the Pacific nations and African nations and South American countries where they are little and they often feel like, yeah, PRC give us a lot of free food, but do they really care about free canned food, canned whatever? They want the dignity that they do not get, and Taiwan could provide that support.
There was an interesting moment on this during the pandemic when Taiwan actually tried to sort of create a narrative around cooperation with Lithuania, with Czechia, with Slovakia, with Poland. the Digital Diplomacy Association from Taiwan. They created this this meme of the dumpling alliance, all 4 countries eating various form of dumplings. We are natural friends who help each other by providing vaccines and masks. I don't know, a little bit, far-fetched in terms of the narrative, but they were trying. But ultimately, Taiwan also needs to play, I think, a little better role in shaping the narrative about itself across Europe. And currently, it is facing strong domestic constraints on that, I think, right? With different parts of political spectrums having very different ideas how to engage with the outside world, with what the identity of the country is. Is it ROC or is it Taiwan, right? And how do you create a compelling narrative if you don't know who you are? And you've been something, and you think of yourself as something different in different segments of the society, right? On the more positive note, though, we've been doing some public opinion polling across Central European countries. So in Slovakia, Czechia, Poland, and Hungary. And we do see over the past 5 years, very big increase of support for Taiwan. In Slovakia, over 5 years, we've gone from a net negative perception to a net positive increase of 18 points. And similar trend in all the other ones, right? I would attribute that mostly to the fact that just Taiwan managed to be mentioned in the discourse in many ways, which kind of got people familiarized with it. More importantly, generally people don't even believe in Chinese discourse on Taiwan. Very few people would support the claim that Taiwan is part of PRC or that the PRC has a genuine claim on Taiwan, right? So there is some underlying things to explore, and Taiwan needs to figure out how to tap into them, ideally through non-political actors, so that it doesn't invite political backlash, right? So more civil society engagement, more people-to-people engagement, and that sort of thing.
Casey?
Thank you. In short answer to Dr. Diamond's question, Mama Papa Lithuanian restaurant in Alameda. More seriously, I'm curious what Lithuania and other countries in Europe are thinking about in terms of de-risking, plan B, essentially. Obviously, you want to improve relations with Taiwan, et cetera. It's a potentially a much valued partner, et cetera. But with critical national security ingredients, you have to say, I need second sources of this, that, and the other stuff, as Europe is already beginning to do, unfortunately, with the US. So what can you say about what Europe may be making, what steps Europe may be making to de-risk?
Europe has been quite strong over the past 5 years on the idea of strengthening its sovereignty. The strategic autonomy discourse is out there, right? Not really talk about decoupling, but de-risking, of course. And some meaningful steps have been done, but ultimately a lot depends on what Germany is gonna do. Many of our economies, especially for the smaller member states, are anchored onto the German economy, being our companies being tier 2, tier 3 suppliers to German companies, right? And then we've seen how that played out in the Lithuanian case. In some countries, this dependence is really so big that most of their trade with China is not direct but mediated through Germany. In light of Lithuania's experience, we ran an econometric analysis on this, and Lithuania, the discrepancy between direct and indirect exports to China were 250%. The same in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, 80%. Most of the region that's sort of anchored into the broader German supply chain, the factory of Europe supply chain, right? It has this kind of issue that they're unable to deal with de-risking from China alone. They need a lot of coordination, and that makes it tricky, given the fact how much political power the German conglomerates have in Germany. That also makes it maybe a little bit slower exercise that we would be hoping for. Nevertheless, we've seen important developments within Europe. I've mentioned before this one tool that was adopted, the anti-coercion instrument, but many others have been developed. And crucially, EU is finally coming to a reckoning with the idea that industrial policy is not a bad protectionism, but something that needs to happen if we want to actually, overcome the problems that we have when it comes to over-reliance on China in some of the critical sectors. So we are seeing more subsidization now, for example, for refining of critical minerals, chip production. Of course, the big issue is what to do with the car industry, right? That's a tricky one because the development of the transition from combustion to EV has kind of escaped us. China is a genuine technological leader here, right? They've gotten there using not so appetizing methods, but they are there right now, right? So this creates a big discussion. Okay, like how are we going to navigate this? Because we do need to maybe a reverse technology transfer now from China back to Europe. So that's also a dimension that is complicating things a little bit.
Just a brief remark. Again, going back to geopolitics a little bit, there were talks throughout the last year about the reverse Kissinger happening. That, due to diplomatic approaches towards Moscow, the United States might be hoping to split the Russian-Chinese alliance. But I was a bit worried when that was announced, kind of just as an idea, not announced, but I mean, when it was starting, to be talked about, I was worried about the other thing happening, that the Kissinger could be played on the transatlantic relations. That if there's a rupture, as to paraphrase Carney, in the transatlantic relations, that China might come out of it as a winner in this. Because countries that would have probably fast-forwarded the risking from China, maybe also for the geopolitical reason, transatlantic reasons, now they will look at it differently. China is on a campaign throughout Europe, the biggest ever delegation in the Munich Security Conference, by China. It's not an accident. It's a plan. It's a strategy. They want to have Europe where they need it, and they're preparing, to keep Europe distracted with the war in Ukraine, to keep Europe, transatlantic relationship divided, so that that we have to maintain ties, right? And countries believe that if we're losing the United States, we still need a at least economic partner. Who that could be? Why not China? So they're taking their time, they're playing it slow, but I've seen that happening. And take a look at Spain in Europe. That's one of the examples of a country going all into their relationship, switching over the relationship from Washington over to Beijing. They're still in NATO, of course. They're still a transatlantic country. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I mean, as much of a diplomatic capital is being invested by Madrid to Beijing. Just read, 6 state visits in a couple of years, something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but it's really crazy. So that tells you that there is some elements of that happening, and we have to keep that in mind.
This discourse is really emerging, especially out of countries like Spain that already before, when we had on the good relations with US, right? We're already in some ways US critical, in some ways pro-China, right? So they're feeling vindicated in their ideology, right? But it is spreading also to those countries and parts of the political spectrum across Europe that would have been traditionally thought as hardcore trans-Atlanticists. We've seen that in Slovakia with Korczak, for example. He was making very weird comments on China, as in he need to use China as a bargaining chip with US. I'm not sure we can do that. So it's, yeah, but you made a good point that the strain in the transatlantic relationship is empowering China, and the appetite for de-risking is one victim of that. If we just think about the car industry, both US and China are almost equally important market for European car makers. Can they deal with trade war with one? Probably. Can they withstand 2-front trade war? Not a chance.
Yeah.
So we have just a couple minutes left. Let's go with this question.
Doris, I have a double question. One about, is the current Lithuanian government's movements about Taiwan part of like mismanaged expectations? That I remember in 2020, 2021, there was a lot of talk like, oh, there's going to be a bunch of investment from Taiwan. There's going to be semiconductor factories and stuff, and that hasn't much materialized. So maybe people are a bit upset that that didn't actually materialize. And second thing, Lithuania is holding the presidency of EU in 27. Do you think it's going to be pushing something about Taiwan there, or do you doubt that that's happening?
During my years, I've always tried to explain other reasoning, because when it comes to the investment from Taiwan, even though I would, privately argue, during my meetings with Taiwan, that maybe it's a smart thing to look at from their perspective, because the government will change and you would need an argument for the next government. But at least in my communication, I would rarely use that as a main thing, right? So it's geopolitics, democracy, values-based decision making, and stuff like that. But you're right. There has been this narrative, which was quite active in Lithuania, and that could also be why it's playing right now, because it has not materialized. We don't have major investment or almost no investment, from Taiwan in Lithuania, which again, it could be a lost opportunity, especially if things go sour. I mean, if Taiwan will lose Lithuania as a partner, that would play pretty badly. And then we would say, the price was basically just, I wouldn't say that the sum of money, but I mean, anything will look small compared to the loss of, diplomatic, status or whatever. Your second question was?
EU presidency.
EU presidency. Look, I don't see current government in Lithuania, playing out Taiwan in any shape or form. Probably because it's too much associated with the previous government, and they want to show a different way, different approach. So even though I believe that's not entirely smart, they could find a way how to work with the question that would be for their benefit as well, and I think that people would accept it. I don't think that there are voters lining up to protest if they do something with Taiwan. I don't feel that sentiment in Lithuania. So it is possible they would be able to do it, but maybe it's a bit too early or lack of understanding.
All right. So we are at time. I want to thank Matej and Gabrielius. A couple bookkeeping items. First, you've been listening online to an event of the Project on Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region here at the Hoover Institution. And second, the Project on Taiwan has two upcoming events. One next Monday called Resilient Realists. We're featuring Dr. Diamond, Tianhong Mao, the president of INPR, and our own Admiral Jim Ellis in a conversation about Taiwan's upcoming security strategy and the relationship with the PRC. So if this event was interesting to you, I encourage you to check that out. And then the following Monday, we have some visitors from Taiwan who work on disinformation, and in particular, FIMI, so foreign information manipulation and interference from the PRC. That'll be on March 9th, also at this institution. So I encourage you to check both of those events out if you enjoyed today's event. And again, thank you to Gabrielius and Matej for a great conversation.